And joining me now is former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. He is the author of the book Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, which addresses what he's declared is an epidemic of loneliness and isolation in America. Dr. Murthy, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I'm so glad to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here for this important conversation. So, as Surgeon General, one of your top priorities was to tackle what you called an epidemic of loneliness and isolation, especially in young people. Dr. Murthy, why is this such an important topic to focus on, and why did you make this such an important focus when you were Surgeon General?
Well, Kristen, this issue came as a real surprise to me. I didn't start my tenure as Surgeon General thinking I was going to focus on loneliness back in 2014. But what I found as I traveled around the country is that people were telling me stories about loneliness everywhere I went. College students on campuses surrounded by thousands of other kids, but saying, I don't feel like anybody knows me. I don't feel like I can be myself. I feel alone. Parents were saying this. CEOs were saying this. Members of Congress were telling me they were struggling with loneliness. Everywhere I went, this is a challenge. And as I dug into the data, two things emerged. One is that loneliness is extraordinarily common. We've got over half of kids who are saying, for example, that they struggle with loneliness. And by the way, kids across the population struggle the most. But it's also consequential. So when you struggle with loneliness and isolation, it raises your risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide. But it also increases your risk of heart disease by 29%, stroke by 31%, dementia by 50%. Among older adults. And the overall mortality increase related to social disconnection is comparable to the mortality impact of smoking and obesity. That's how powerful and how important loneliness is.
Yeah, and just to delve into it, you say smoking. It actually, as you say in your book Together, is the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, Dr. Murthy. That's a staggering figure. Explain the science behind those numbers, those figures that you just talked about.
Well, it turns out that our connection with one another, this is not just a nice thing to have. It's biologically an imperative for us. It's something we need for survival, just like we need food and water. And when we're deprived of social connection, that actually puts our body into a stress state. We feel like we're under threat. Now, in the short term, stress can sometimes help you, right? When you're preparing for an exam or for a presentation. But imagine chronic stress that comes from chronic loneliness. That's when it starts to increase inflammation in our body, increase our risk for heart disease and other conditions that ultimately shorten our life.
And when you were Surgeon General, you actually went on a listening tour all across the country to talk to families about what they were experiencing. Why is loneliness hitting young people so hard? What did you find?
Well, there are a few things that have been happening. One is just over time, we have just moved around more. We change communities, change jobs. We tend to leave the people we know behind. We also find, though, that over the last half century in our country, participation in the kind of organizations that used to bring people together, faith organizations, recreational leagues, service organizations, has all declined. But what I worry about for young people in particular is the impact that technology is having on their social connection. We tend to think, oh, kids are on social media, that's great because they're connected to one another. But no, we have to recognize there's a difference between the connections you have online and the connections you have in person. And as more relationships have shifted online, we're realizing that, number one, more kids are struggling with this intense culture of self-comparison online, which is shredding their self-esteem. A lot of them are trying to be somebody that they're not online, and they actually don't have as many friendships in person as we all need. So you put this all together, and what you see is escalating loneliness and isolation. And I'll tell you this, the people who know about this most are young people themselves, because they would tell me all the time how lonely they were. One student that I talked to at a college, as I was traveling the country, he said to me, he said, how are we supposed to connect with one another when it's no longer the culture for people to talk to each other? And I had him repeat the question because I wasn't sure I heard him right the first time, but he's saying it's no longer the culture for people to talk to each other. And I saw that on college campuses. The first college I went to, I walked into the dining hall and it was quiet. Wow. And I remember the dining hall being really loud in college.
Yes.
But everyone is on their devices, their ears are plugged, with their earbuds, and they're not talking to one another.
Wow, it's just staggering. That is a powerful anecdote. And you tell of meeting a mother also from Colorado it's such a tragic story. Her daughter committed suicide after she was bullied online. And this is a mom who was deeply engaged in her daughter's activities online. Dr. Murthy, talk to the parents out there who hear stories like that and they are terrified but also concerned their children may be falling through the cracks. What's the message and what are the warning signs?
Well, listen, parents do have good reason to be worried right now, and many parents already are. The most common question I got from parents around the country was about social media. They asked, is this really safe for my kids? And that was the reason I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on social media and youth mental health. Lori, the young mother that you mentioned in Colorado who I met, was one of the most tragic stories that I encountered. But she did everything that you think a parent should want to do. She talked to her kids about social media. She checked her daughter's phone every night, before she went to bed to understand what she was using, what she wasn't. But what she didn't know was that there were ways that her daughter could hide apps under other apps. Her daughter had multiple accounts that she didn't even know about. And she only realized after her daughter took her own life that she'd been mercilessly bullied and harassed online. And she saw just how her self-esteem had been shredded. Here's what I would tell parents. Number one, this is a journey that is difficult for any of us to make alone. And it's important for us to talk to each other as parents, to come together and to support each other. Because right now, a lot of parents think that everyone else has figured it out and they're the only ones struggling. That is not the case. The second thing you should know as parents about technology and social media is delaying the use of social media for your kid as long as possible is important. And that's because the adolescent brain is not the same as an adult brain. If you look biologically, young people's brains are in a different phase of development. They're more susceptible to social comparison, to social suggestion. Their impulse control is not as well developed. And that puts them more at risk of the negative effects of social media. I would wait until at least after middle school. And in high school, this is what we're planning to do for my kids. We're going to reassess based on whether real safety standards have been put in place, what the data is telling us, and the maturity of our kids. But finally this, if your kids are already on social media, what do? I think it's important for us to create tech-free zones in their life to protect the dimensions of a kid's life that are critical for their development, like sleep, like in-person interaction, learning, and physical activity. So that means no phones an hour before bedtime. You can get them back in the morning. To meal times, dedicate those to in-person, face-to-face conversation without devices. If we lead by example in this as parents, we can do a lot to help our kids.
You actually, you just referenced this as Surgeon General called for warning labels to be placed on social media. And look, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, he puts a number on what you were just saying. He says kids should not be on social media until they're at least 16 years old. It's a part of rewiring children's brains. Can you take us through the science of that? And is 16, I know you said after middle school, would you say 16 is the appropriate age?
I think 16 is a very reasonable age for parents to consider as a threshold. And look, some kids who might be very mature, perhaps some of them may be ready a bit earlier. Some kids actually may need more time past 16. But I think 16 is a good benchmark. We know that our brain is evolving a lot during adolescence. And what we've also seen in studies is that kids who are using social media a lot, who have problematic social media use, we do see changes both in the structure and the function of the brain. So the bottom line is these devices, these platforms in particular, social media platforms, are having an effect on our children. And it's why what I have called on Congress to do is not only put warning labels on social media platforms so that parents and kids are aware of the risks that we see, but I've also called on Congress, even more importantly, to establish safety standards for social media platforms so that, number one, data transparency is required. Researchers routinely say they can't get the full data about the impact of these platforms on our kids' health from the companies. But just like we did for cars a few decades ago, where we put in safety standards that got us seatbelts, airbags, crash testing, and those reduced the number of deaths, we got to do the same for social media. Because what we're doing now, Kristen, is it's equivalent of putting our kids in cars with no seatbelts, with no airbags, and having them drive on roads with no speed limits and no traffic lights. And that is just morally unacceptable. I think Congress has so far failed in its responsibility to protect our kids, but it's not too late. They need to step up and act now.
It's an absolutely terrifying comparison. And Dr. Murthy, you say the way to actually keep kids off social media is to get a group of parents, a community. And I do want to talk to you about that idea, community. When you left office in January, you wrote what you call a parting prescription for America: not to eat less sugar, not to exercise more. It was 2 words. I want to put the 2 words up on the screen because they're powerful. Choose community. What is it Dr. Murthy, about community that is so powerful and important?
Well, Kristen, over thousands of years, we evolved to be with each other. The people who went off on their own in our hunter-gatherer days and said, you know what, I don't need anyone. I can be strong, independent, just do everything by myself. That person got eaten by a predator, or they starved from an insufficient food supply. There is real strength in numbers. But I worry that in recent decades, what has happened is we've lost sight of how vital and important our communities are. As we've been pulled more into our devices and as we can get everything delivered to our doorstep, we have less interactions with each other. But what I have found is that community really is what we all crave. It's what we need. And I know this because in the conversations I have with people across the country, in big towns and small areas of the country, in rural and urban spaces, people talk about the fact that they just wish that people knew their neighbors again. They wish that we looked out for each other, that we gave each other the benefit of the doubt. Here's what community is. Community is where we know each other, where we help each other, and where we find purpose in lifting each other up. That's why relationships, purpose, and service, that is the core ingredients of community. It's also the triad of fulfillment. That's how I think of it. And I think part of the reason we are seeing so much unhappiness in our world right now is because these three elements of relationships, purpose, and service have eroded in many of our lives. And that's why I believe it's so important for us to build that back. It's why it was the focus of my parting prescription to America. And it's why going forward, long after I'm out of office, my goal is to do everything I can to help rebuild community in our country and beyond.
All right. Really critical information. Dr. Vivek Murthy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.